It's official. Jerry Jeudy snubbed by my colleagues here at the Locked On Network, and I have plenty to say about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Our Locked On Network Top 100 list is officially here, and I have a bone to pick with my fellow hosts at this very network. Which Browns did make the list? Was anybody else snubbed? We'll talk about it. Plus, our training camp previews continue as we turn to the running back room, which is suddenly a group that's in flux heading into training camp here coming up next week. I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday. From here on out, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well. It's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. And, of course, to the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show. Share your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. The official Locked On Network Top 100 Players list is live. And the thing that I thought might come to fruition, I mentioned this last week, that I was worried that my fellow hosts were not going to feel the same way I do about Jerry Jeudy, and it did come to fruition. There was simply no love for Jerry Jeudy from other hosts around this network. And listen, on one hand, I can understand where I'm sure some people, NFL fans at large, other hosts at this network, I honestly do love all my fellow hosts. I have a lot of respect for them. But there's probably a sense of they need to see Jerry Jeudy do this again. They need to see Jerry Jeudy replicate what he did last season in his fifth year in this league and prove that it's not just like a one-off thing and a fluke thing. And because, again, to this point in his career, it had sort of been up and down. There was a lot of, good. There was some good mixed in with some bad. Someone thought he was a bust. He never had a 1,000-yard season before. I understand all those things. I can certainly sympathize and recognize that makes it difficult to evaluate him to some degree, and where some people probably did feel, well, I'm just not ready to put him in there yet because he hasn't done it consistently enough yet, and it took him 5 years to get there. I understand all those arguments against Jerry Jeudy being a top 100 player, but there are plenty of arguments for it as well, and the biggest one being, throughout his career, he has had some of the most inconsistent quarterback situations in NFL history, arguably. Like this, in Denver, it was a constant carousel of just random insert your project quarterbacks. He had Drew Lock at a point. He had just an assortment of bad quarterback play. Russell Wilson was the most consistent thing he had. And interestingly enough, his first year with Russell Wilson, before Sean Payton got there, he had his best season prior to last year. And he almost had a 1,000-yard season that year and his best season in terms of touchdowns. And then the year after that wasn't quite as good, partially because Sean Payton sort of changed things up, realized that Russell Wilson wasn't the quarterback for him anyway. And then they sort of part ways with him. They part ways with Jerry Jeudy, and it's all from there. They go their separate ways, and Jerry comes to Cleveland and balls out the way that he did. But I think last year, along the lines of having inconsistent quarterback play, last year was more of the same. He had an inconsistent Deshaun Watson, who was one of the worst quarterbacks we've seen play in quite some time. He had Jameis Winston, who's a turnover machine, but also a gunslinger who can sling it out, and certainly helped Jerry Jeudy boost his numbers during the portion of the season that he was playing under center. And that's a big reason why he ended up a Pro Bowler and all those things. And he sort of lit, he helped Jerry Jeudy just take his game up a notch during that stretch of the season where he was under center. And that can't be understated, but that was the most consistent play he had last year. And then he gets DTR, who sort of didn't really look his way very often. And then he gets in the last game even a little bit of Bailey Zappi. Like it was a joke of a quarterback situation last year. A lot of inconsistency under center, and that's always going to impact ultimately a wide receiver's results. And despite all that, Jerry Jeudy still went out and had a 1,200-yard season. He still went out and had a productive year and earned Pro Bowl honors, and was named by his own peers to the top 100 players list. And what's perplexing to me, and I will go through more in depth this entire list. There are 2 Browns on it. You can probably guess who they are. We'll talk about this, any other players we thought were snubs or not. And I'll go sort of slide by slide here and show you where different guys ended up and how this list kind of ultimately played itself out. So we'll get to all that coming up next segment. But Jerry, I can tell you, is not on it based on what, the tweets that have been out there. I can also just here, I'll just throw it up for you. The obvious is Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward are the guys that are on it. Those are the 2 Browns players that made the list. And Myles, you see, is number 4 overall. Denzel Ward is 84 overall. So we'll get more into the minutia of the list itself, where those guys fell, if there's anybody else missing. But to me, Jerry Jeudy should have been on this list. And I think doing what he did last year with the disastrous, inconsistent, flimsy clown show of a quarterback situation he had speaks to how good of a player that he is. And here's I dove into the numbers on this list a little bit as well to sort of break this down for you even further. There are 15 wide receivers on this list. Not one is Jerry Jeudy or even Brian Thomas Jr., who, by the way, Brian Thomas Jr. had an even better season last year than even Jerry Jeudy did in terms of his production, in terms of his numbers, in terms of what he brought to the table and did for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so I will sit here and speak up on that as well. His 1,282 yards, he had 10 touchdowns last year. I don't know how he doesn't make the top 100 either. Him and Jerry Jeudy, to me, both are snubs on this list if you're talking about wide receivers. And for 15 guys to make it and not one of them be either of those guys is perplexing to me. Davante Adams is the last wide receiver that makes this list. He's in the late 90s. I'll throw up that last slide here. Here's Davante Adams is 97th overall. Malik Neighbors is on here as 92nd overall. Davante Adams, number 97 overall. He's the last wide receiver on the list. And to me, Davante Adams making this list is based off of just name recognition alone. It's the power of the name of Davante Adams, because I don't think Davante Adams at this stage in his career is necessarily a top 100 player anymore. I just don't. I understand he had an inconsistent situation of his own. He was in Las Vegas, didn't work out, goes and joins his buddy Aaron Rodgers and put up some solid numbers playing with Aaron Rodgers again. Great. I don't consider him at this point in his career a top 100 receiver or top 100 player. I don't consider him one of the top 15 wide receivers in football at this point anymore either. I think guys like I just named, Jerry Jeudy and Brian Thomas Jr., have passed him by. So I found that kind of crazy that Davante Adams was the last guy in. And I can understand some of the others that make this list. Drake London is also on here. And he had his first 1,000-yard season, and there's been steady progress in Drake London year over year. He had 866 yards year one on 72 receptions. He had less receptions in 2023 and had more yards, less touchdowns, but again, bad quarterback situation. 2024, he had 100 receptions this past year and 1,271 yards of his own. But Brian Thomas Jr.'s numbers were better than his, and he still didn't make the list. And Jerry Jeudy, the touchdown numbers were obviously low. I get that. But again, this offense was historically bad last year for the Browns. They scored the least amount of touchdowns in the league last year with just 29 of them, which when you really think about it, 4 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy basically scored 14% of the touchdowns the team had last year. So again, I just think that if you watch the Browns at all last year, and I understand it was a painful watch, they were 3-14. But if you're if you are an NFL pundit, if you're somebody who follows the NFL and you saw the Browns at all last year, you understood that Jerry Jeudy was a diamond in the rough on a team that was struggling in an immense way. And his numbers speak to that. The Browns got this right. They got the trade right, acquiring him. They banked on him being in a new place and thriving. He did that. I get where people probably want to see him do it again. But you saw Drake London do 1,000 yards for the first time and you didn't hesitate. You saw Davante Adams have less than 1,000 yards and you just kept him in the top 100 because it's Davante Adams and you banked off of that. Like you saw, I'm confused as to how, again, two receivers that I consider top 15 in the NFL, and Jeudy and Brian Thomas Jr. don't make this list, but there's 15 wide receivers on it. There is a kicker. There is a kicker on this list. And that's all due respect to Brandon Audrey, because he is phenomenal. But I don't know how a kicker makes the top 100. I get it to a degree. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm going to assume that Justin Tucker made the top 100 prior to all his drama off the field stuff going on. And when he was at the peak of his powers, I'm sure his own peers voted him in. But at the same time, man, like, I have a hard time putting kickers who are very specific to just doing one thing on the field above a number of different position players and guys who do different things. And so I am going to bang this drum forever and always until next year's top 100 that Jerry Jeudy was snubbed on this year's iteration, in the first iteration, mind you, of the Locked On Network's top 100 players list. Who did make the list? I told you it's Denzel Ward and Myles Garrett. Were there any other snubs, though, from the Cleveland Browns that we can discuss? I'll roll through the whole list with you as well in case you didn't see it at the network-wide channel, and we'll talk about this list as a whole. We'll do it all coming up next in the Locked On Browns podcast. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about the baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. Listen, I get it. The NBA playoffs wrapped not so long ago. The NHL, same thing. We're in the middle of the MLB All-Star break. But summer, while it's considered a downtime in the sports calendar, as you're counting down the days to football starting, it doesn't have to be if you make FanDuel part of your viewing experience. At night, put my son down to bed, I generally throw some baseball on the TV. And while I'm doing that, I also throw together some bets at FanDuel, whether it's placing the same game parlay, watching a bet right into the ninth inning. FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action each and every single night. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so we're going to go through the list here. You'll see where the two Browns players fell. We'll discuss if there's anybody else that we feel like got snubbed here from the Cleveland Browns, and if there's anybody even close to being considered top 10 on the Browns other than the three guys I've discussed, or I will discuss, because Jerry is the guy that I think was obviously third in mind for me and should have made it. But the top 10, I think this to me feels appropriate. Now, you could argue like maybe Myles should be 2 or 3 or whatever. I get all that. But I understand we're putting quarterbacks primarily in the top 3 spots, or even the top 5 spots, frankly, with Joe Burrow coming in there at 5 makes a lot of sense to me. So Lamar Jackson being number 1 maybe surprises some people over Patrick Mahomes, but he had yet another phenomenal season last year. And I think he has proven at this point that he's one of the best quarterbacks in football. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and then comes Myles Garrett. I think any list that has Myles Garrett in the top 5 is sensible when you're talking about him being measured against some of the best quarterbacks in this sport and how important that position is. I think that top 5 makes a lot of sense. I think the next 5 make a lot of sense. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, both those guys, phenomenal receivers, the 2 best in football. Micah Parsons makes it as well, makes some sense there. And then Patrick Surtain as number 9, as the top corner or DB on this list. And then Saquon Barkley, who again, him not being in the top 10 would have felt disingenuous. That guy had a phenomenal year last year, re-cemented himself as the best running back in the game, hands down. And so I think that top 10 is pretty standard and makes a lot of sense. TJ Watt comes in just on the other side of the top 10. I think this area of the board makes a lot of sense as well. Chris Jones, Penei Sewell, Derrick Henry, Max Crosby, A.J. Brown, Nick Bosa, Lane Thomas, CeeDee Lamb, Trey Hendrickson. Bosa, I had Bosa a little lower on my list. I think I had him in the 20s, but I understand where he still has the stay power, the recognition, and the play to belong probably in this top 20 in the eyes of many of my peers. So I thought that was fine. Tristan Wirfs, George Kittle, George Singletary. You can sort of read through the names here. I don't have to read them all off for you. I'm not going to do all 100, but this is the next phase of the board, getting you to 30. Tyreek Hill falls in line here. Fred Warner, I believe the first linebacker on the board. Tristan Wirfs, that one still hurts Browns fans because they could have had him over Jedrick Wills and they didn't take him. We go to 31 through 40, and here's where you get some more skill position guys. You get Jaden Daniels making the list, making his appearance on the list at 31 overall. Monmouth St. Brown is here. Some more pass rushers. Matt Stafford, one of the higher quarterbacks to end up on this list, which I think is certainly appropriate, with Justin Herbert on there as well. Brock Bowers after year one, already 38th on this list, so that's pretty impressive. I'm going to be honest, as I read through this, by the way, I got to this point in the list, like around 50, and I started to wonder, where the hell is Denzel Ward? Why isn't Denzel Ward on this list? Where the hell is he? What's going on here? What did my colleagues do? Did they also snub Denzel Ward? I'm like flipping through here, and I'm like, how is he not on here yet? He is coming, but I was surprised he hadn't. He was. I will say I'm surprised that he was as low as he was, especially after the season that he had last year. But this page hurts a little bit because you see Baker Mayfield on there, 47th overall, just behind Jalen Hurts, which is somewhat interesting. We keep it moving, 51 to 60. Zach Bond rounds it out. Trent McDuffie starts it off. You get CJ Stroud in here from a quarterback standpoint. Some more offensive, a lot of offensive line guys listed on this page. 61 to 70. Nico Collins makes an appearance. You get a tight end and Trey McBride, more offensive line. And you get your first rookie mentioned on this list in Travis Hunter, who comes in at 67, which you can make a case like you should have an established guy over somebody like that. But I understand where I put Travis Hunter, I think, even higher on my list. I want to say I had him in the 50s, so I can wrap my head around that one. You keep moving here. And I'm pretty sure he is the only rookie, by the way, on this list, if I remember correctly. So we'll see how it rounds out. But this is where you have Brendan Audrey, who I mentioned last segment, as the one kicker on the list. He comes in at 76 overall. I think this page sort of made a lot of sense too. And then finally we get to the 80s and you get Denzel Ward on here just ahead of Travis Kelce. I'm not going to say it was a snub. He made the list, so I'm not going to complain about that one. But Denzel being 84 was surprising to me, for if nothing else, the fact that he had arguably his best season of his career last year when with the Browns, and I was surprised that he ended up sort of being so low. But this is the first iteration of this. It's not like I have a list to go off of last year and be like, well, last year Denzel was 90th, so he actually rose 6 spots. Like, so I understand where it's the first attempt at this, and sometimes things are going to slip through the cracks, so I can respect that. But Denzel at least made the list, and those are your two Browns who make it. We'll round things out here with the final page for you, which I did show you last segment as well. But Malik Neighbors on here. Dak Prescott, is the last QB on. You get Bradley Chubb on here. You get Devontae Adams as the last receiver on here, which I still find preposterous. And that's kind of how things fall the rest of the way. So your two Browns players on here, of course, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. I think that makes a lot of sense. I pushed for the 3. I wanted Jerry Jeudy's little picture on this page as well. And I think if I'm looking at the Browns roster and talking about which guys are deserving of this honor being named to any top 100 players list that's out there, including the one that's voted on by the players that the NFL has been rolling out, obviously, on their own in the NFL Network. I think those are the 3 guys I primarily look at. It's Myles, it's Denzel, it's Jerry Jeudy. I'm not going to sit here beyond the Jeudy thing that I spent an entire segment ranting about and tell you that I think, anybody else got snubbed. I feel pretty strongly like those are the 3 that were deserving, and everybody else is just kind of where they are. And it's 100 players across 32 teams with rosters of 53 players. Like, that's a lot of players to choose from to sort of sort through this thing. And I understand where like different people have different perspectives on who belongs in the top 100. So I understood I wasn't expecting to get like a massive crop of Browns players on this list. And so I think I would stop myself short of saying anybody beyond Jeudy belonged, but I can understand arguments for a Wyatt Teller, for example, who still is one of the best interior offensive linemen in this league. And getting back to Kevin Stefanski's offense, he very well might just reestablish himself as that guy and being able to do the things that he does, pulling especially on some of those power schemes and the run block, the power blocking schemes. Like, I'm excited to see them get back to this and see if that group, as I've talked about, I even talked about it just as recently as yesterday in previewing the offensive line as a whole. If they can get back to dominance, like, yeah, you could see somebody like Wyatt Teller end up back in a top 100 conversation again next year. So we'll see how it all shakes out, obviously, in 2026. but this is the first iteration of this list for our network, and I thought it was a pretty fun exercise in general. Anybody else, like, what the way this whole process started, to give you full transparency and sort of a peek behind the curtain here, is that they asked us to rank like the top 10 players on our team. And I think when I did mine, I had Myles, Denzel, Jerry. I think I had Teller next. And then I think I had like Quinshon Judkins, maybe 5, because I've been so high on Quinshon Judkins. Well, now it's not that I listen, there was only going to be, you had to be like a really talented rookie to have be in any sort of conversation for being in the top 100. I had Mason Graham in there somewhere. I might have Mason Graham ahead of Quinshon. I don't remember, but I think Quinshon was on there. Mason was on there. I had a couple rookies, obviously. I think that I had Joel on there, if I remember correctly. So listen, like it was a step-by-step process here. It was well thought out, and I wasn't expecting the Browns to have a ton of guys on this list, but I did think Jerry belonged, and unfortunately he didn't make the cut. But do you feel that anybody else got snubbed in this top 100 ranking of players for us here at the Locked On Network? You can let me know in the comments section here at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel or on Twitter at Spencito_. But in the name of continuing our training camp previews, that Browns running back room, which I just mentioned, Quinshon Judkins, suddenly faces major questions. We will preview the group coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, so we started our previews looking at the quarterback room. We went to the trenches, the guys up front, the hog mollies up front, who are going to be crucial to the Browns' success this season, getting back to Stefanski's offense, and particularly the group that we're going to preview today, which of course is the running back room. And we know what sort of looms, this dark cloud that looms overhead with this group in general, which is, of course, the Quinshon Judkins situation, his availability during camp here coming up next week. Rookies are supposed to report on Friday. It doesn't sound like right now he's going to be there. He doesn't even have his contract signed yet, and he's still dealing with the legal recourse of the situation he's wrapped up in. But the big thing that we need to know more about is what's going to happen with him in terms of his availability during the season. Is he going to face suspension for this? How many games is it going to be? And that certainly changes the math on what we thought this room might look like during training camp, leading up to the season, all those things, and just in general for the season. And so suddenly some things have changed. The outlook has changed here for where the Browns are going to sort of, how the Browns are going to sort of use or deploy these guys in the running back room, and what that group overall depth chart wise could potentially look like. Now, what's interesting is with Quinshon sort of in limbo is maybe a good way to put it right now. I do think this is almost like a thank your lucky stars you have Jerome Ford moment. And I'm not saying I don't think Jerome is an elite back in this league by any stretch. I don't even think necessarily he's like a great back. I think he is like an average to above average at times running back in this league. I think he's fine. I think he can do what you ask him to do. I do think getting back to the original Kevin Stefanski, the OG Kevin Stefanski offense benefits him. He can just kind of focus on running where he needs to run and make those plays, becomes more of a focal point. And we know he can be like a third down guy who can catch passes as well. But you also have Dylan Sampson to relieve some of those responsibilities too, which is the good news here. You did revamp this room immensely this offseason with the way that you drafted these running backs. So it's a good situation to be in terms of having a veteran with experience, but also some young guys that you can sort of turn to and rely on. And yes, it does change the outlook because they have literally used the term workhorse when referring to Quinshon Judkins. And Deuce Staley, on one of the last days of minicamp, talked about using both Quinshon and Dylan Sampson in different ways. How Quinshon's going to be like your first and second down guy. Sampson will be more your third down guy. And together they kind of mix and match and form this dynamic duo. That is going to get put on pause potentially, where we won't see those guys immediately. But again, you have Jerome Ford to sort of lead the charge here. And frankly, before even camp started, Jerome Ford might have still had like a leg up just because he's been here. He knows the offense. The team feels pretty comfortable with him. I still would have said I think Quinshon probably starts because they drafted him in the second round. They felt strongly about him for a reason. But I can understand where like Ford is not just going to like lay down and give this starting role up, and the Browns still value him at a level where hey, we reworked his contract to keep him here because we want to have you be part of this room, and he wanted to stick around, so here he is. So I think this is like you have a guy that you feel like you can sort of rely on. You have Dylan Sampson behind him to start to see at least what he can sort of bring to the table, and you have at least a 1-2 punch that maybe isn't the initial 1-2 punch that we thought it was going to be. And then you still have Pierre Strong in this room as well, who at least provides some depth for you and adds that element of, hey, he's a special teams guy who can be a returner for you on some level and potentially help you in that phase of the game as well. And that like, where the next phase of that conversation, as far as the running back room is concerned, is like whether or not they will look to add somebody before camp, especially if this is a prolonged thing for Quinshon Judkins. And it's a good question. I think these teams always generally want a lot of bodies on their 90-man roster at a bunch of positions during camp, especially one like running back that takes a beating. That obviously is gets a lot. Like they're going to be using and flexing the depth chart throughout the preseason, because those groups, like you run the ones a lot during joint practices, and then you get to the preseason games, you use the guys kind of down the roster more so to just kind of get through the preseason. So it wouldn't hurt to have an extra body if he ends up being suspended. Maybe they want to keep 4 running backs. It wouldn't hurt to have an extra body around for a little while as well. In that regard, I've already seen people bring up Dearness Johnson as a guy who's still out there as a free agent, old friend of the Cleveland Browns. So maybe they do look to add somebody. As things stand right now, though, I'm assuming they're going to give you the blanket, like, we'll let the legal process play out and see, and then what like roster moves come from there. And now what's interesting again is that Quinshon hasn't signed his contract yet. So he's not even technically like on the roster officially because he hasn't done that. And they seem pretty poised to be patient with the situation, both from a legal standpoint and the contract standpoint. I'm sure he's lost some guaranteed money here because of this whole thing, that he was hoping that he was going to get a fully guaranteed contract, and that may not be the case now. So we'll have to see what that looks like as well. But yes, the Quinshon Judkins situation has changed the math on this running back room in general. And it is disappointing because, as I've talked about, that is a room that I think people were very excited about getting back to being the identity of this team, with a running back that had people very excited just in terms of his play style, the way he runs the football, what he brings to the table. The fact that he didn't have any character issues, like you felt pretty good about the guy and the person that you had brought in as well. And it's kind of backfired here a little bit in a surprising way. And now you might have to wait to see that. And especially early in the season where, listen, I know we've talked a lot about this early portion of the schedule being a gauntlet, but it's all based off of last year. Early season teams like are sort of figuring themselves out. That's the stretch of the season where you want a strong run game, where you want a team, when you want to sort of be able to flex those muscles, and having Quinshon out there for that is something that I think the Browns were hoping for. But now that might throw a wrench in their plans, and so I think you pivot back to Jerome Ford and you kind of go from there. But this group in flux, very much so, leading into training camp. We'll see what the rep share looks like and how they sort of divvy things up moving forward, and how they sort of attack it, understanding that Quinshon might not be in the picture, at least for the early portion of the season. In the meantime, that's going to do it for another episode of the Locked On Browns podcast. I want to thank you for joining me, as always, to talk about your favorite football team. We got plenty to come throughout the remainder of this week as rookies report on Friday. We'll try to we'll circle back and maybe have some other tentacle conversations off of the top 100 list. We'll preview another position group. We're looking at the wide receivers tomorrow, which I just gave you an emphatic rant about Jerry Jeudy today being snubbed in our top 100. Still can't believe it. Still so disappointed. But make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. And for your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being on every day here at the Locked On Podcast Network. I'll talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.